Hey there, this is a video response to supermr Atheist. On his video, chances for God is not 50-50. The first thing you said was that chances for God are not 50-50. First I'd like to explain to you why people sometimes say that the chances of God existing are 50-50. The reason for this is a lot of people think that there is no evidence to suggest that there is a God, and that there also is no evidence to suggest that there is not a God. If this is true, then it would be that there's about a probability of 50-50 chance that God exists. Now, you seem to go on and explain that this isn't the case, that this is not 50-50. Now, the only reason I can think that you would say this is to suggest that there is reason to believe that God does not exist. But instead of doing that, you go on to explain how there is not evidence to suggest that God exists, which is exactly what the person suggesting that the chances are 50-50 would be saying. So I don't see what your point is to begin with. But I will go on. There will never be evidence for God, is what you said. But this isn't. How is this the case at all? You're assuming that with science you can never prove that there is a God? You have to explain that. I'm really baffled by this. Because what reasons do you have to believe that there will never be evidence? Just because if you believe that there hasn't been the case that in the past they've been able to prove it, what makes you think that in the future, with more knowledge and capability, we won't be able to? Actually, I believe that science has evidence for theism, in the sense that there has been science used in arguments to suggest that God exists. The teleological argument, the cosmological arguments, such as the Kalam cosmological argument, are good examples of this. They use science in their premises to formulate logical conclusions that suggest that there is some type of bodiless mind or prime mover or creator God. Every day scientists are making new discoveries that don't show that God exists. I don't understand how this is a problem at all. It makes no sense. I mean, are you trying to suggest that because there haven't been any, you're not finding any evidence to suggest God exists with science, that therefore God does not exist? This is a false dilemma. You're setting up a problem here. You're trying to say that either science can prove it or it doesn't exist. But there are a lot of things that we can't prove with science that we assume to exist. It sounds like you're taking up a position called scientism, which is the belief that all things that exist can be proven with science. But if you're trying to hold that belief that the only things that can be proved or proved with science, then how do you prove that the only things that can be proved or proved with science? You can't. You have to go into metaphysics and come up with some type of abstract law or some type of metaphysical law. Every day, yeah. God would never give you evidence for his existence. How would you know this? It sounds as if you're making some type of assumption as to what this God would be like. We have no idea from your stance what this God would be like if he does exist. But I take the stance of a theist that believes in the Christian God. So I believe that this God would show that he exists. In fact, I think he did so by coming down in human form and doing miracles and among other things. Now, I'd like to ask you a question. How do you feel about the cosmologicals, such as the Kalam cosmological argument, the teleological, the ontological, the belief in God being proper, the belief in God is properly basic, and the moral argument? Because all these things seem to suggest that there is a more than 50-50 chance that God does exist. But yet, you go on to suggest that it's actually the other way around. Christianity is based on faith. You're correct. Christianity is based on faith, trust, but not faith that God exists. It's faith that God will come through for us, that he will do the things that he promised. To have faith in God and the things that he told us that they are true. It is not to believe that he exists. So you go on to say that if somebody tries to present evidence that God exists, that you should just tell them that their belief is falling apart. This makes absolutely no sense. There's nowhere in the Bible that it says that there cannot be evidence, or that there should not be evidence, or that you should not be looking for evidence. In fact, it says to love God with all of your knowledge, and to be ready to defend the faith. And he has done things that would be evidence. For instance, I don't want to get into it because it's a very touchy field, and I feel that the metaphysical arguments are way more supported. But there are historical arguments to suggest that the miracles that occurred in the Bible actually happened. So why would be the case that God would come down as a human being, bring people back from the dead, and resurrect his son, and yet all the time not want anybody to have any type of evidence to believe that he's real? It makes absolutely no sense. And the last thing I'd like to say is, how in the world would this be supporting of atheism? If you could prove that God exists with evidence, how does it then therefore follow that all your belief is falling apart? There isn't a God. What? That's just logically contradictory. Lastly, I'd like to say that even if all the things I said are not true, there is still no reason in your video presented that suggests that atheism is true, that there is no God. So, it would still go back to exactly where we started, a 50-50 chance that God exists. Now, I would very much appreciate you make a video response to this. I do not want to have a conversation over the comments in YouTube. And if you do make a response, I would very much like for you to do one of two things. If you want to make an attempt to suggest that there is more than a 50% chance that God does not exist, then I would like for you to present arguments for atheism and take down the arguments that I presented in this video, or ask questions about them because I had not gone into them in full detail. If you want to suggest that there is a 50-50 chance still and that you were wrong, that there is not more than a 50-50 chance that God does not exist, then I'd appreciate if you would go over my arguments and suggest why they are not sound arguments and why they do not suggest that God exists. If that is the case, then I will settle there is not more than a 50-50% chance that God exists, but your argument in your video would still be false. I'm looking forward to your response. Thank you so much for your time.